She thought she had the perfect setup, an insult disguised as a joke. But in just seconds, Jin BTS turned the tables and left her struggling to recover on live TV. The stage was set, a brightly lit studio in Seoul, packed with an audience that had come for a spectacle. The cameras were rolling, the tension thick, though no one had spoken a word yet. Seated at the glossy, oversized interview desk was Kim Seokjin, known worldwide as Jin of BTS, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. Across from him sat Park Min-ji, a popular talk show host known for her sharp tongue and pointed jabs at K-pop idols. She had built a career on moments like these, baiting, provoking, watching her guests squirm under the heat of her questions. Tonight, she had something planned. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, shifting in their seats. They expected controversy. They expected fireworks. Jin's interviews were never uneventful, and Min-ji knew exactly how to stir the pot. From the moment the cameras went live, she was on the offensive. "Jin, thank you for being here," she said with a saccharine smile, her voice dripping with false politeness. Jin nodded slightly, his hands folded in front of him. "My pleasure, Min-ji SSI. Let's see if you can keep up." A few chuckles rippled through the audience, but Min-ji didn't flinch. She was used to this kind of banter. If anything, she welcomed it. The opening minutes followed a predictable pattern. Music, career, the usual back and forth. Min-ji took shots. Jin swatted them away effortlessly. The audience seemed entertained, though they were waiting for something bigger, something more personal. And Min-ji was about to deliver exactly that. She shifted in her chair, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as if preparing to drop a bomb. Then, with a casual air, she leaned in, her eyes gleaming with something just short of malice. She asked the question, but she had no idea what was coming next. For a split second, the room froze. The air felt heavier, as if the temperature had just shifted. The audience, once murmuring and chuckling, fell dead silent. Even the camera operators, trained to remain detached, seemed to hesitate. Park Min-ji kept her smirk, but something in her posture betrayed her. She had gone too far, and she knew it. The words still hung in the air, bold and shameless. "Have you ever thought about dating someone younger? Because, let's be honest, your mom must be getting old now." It was a low blow, and she had delivered it without flinching. The insult was wrapped in a joke, but there was no mistaking the intent. She wasn't just prodding for a reaction. She was baiting him, daring him to stumble in front of millions of viewers. The audience didn't know whether to gasp or laugh. Some chuckled nervously. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances. Even those who weren't Jin's fans could tell this wasn't just a playful jab. It was personal. It was cruel. And for the first time that evening, Jin didn't respond right away. He just stared, not at Min-ji, not at the audience, but at the desk in front of him, his fingers lightly tapping against the surface. It was subtle, but the tension in the room was suffocating. Min-ji shifted slightly in her chair. She hadn't expected silence. She expected an outburst, a dismissive wave, maybe a witty retort in return. But not this. Then slowly, Jin lifted his head. His expression was unreadable, a mix of amusement, disbelief, and something sharper. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "Let me get this straight," he said, pausing just long enough for the weight of his words to settle. "You're sitting there on national television calling my mother, a woman who raised me, supported me, and sacrificed everything for my dreams, old?" The word itself lingered, sharp as a blade. Somewhere in the crowd, someone muttered, "Damn." Min-ji gave a half-hearted shrug, clearly trying to maintain her composure. "Oh, come on, Genius," she said, forcing a laugh. "It's just a question. Lighten up." Jin leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on hers. "It's not a question, Min-ji SSI. It's an insult. But let's pretend for a second that you actually meant it as a real question." The smirk on her face wavered. Jin gestured toward the audience. "Imagine if I flipped it around. Imagine I was sitting here with a married female idol, and I asked her, 'Hey, have you ever thought about leaving your husband? Because let's be honest, he's kind of outdated.'" A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Some nodded, others sat up straighter. Jin let that thought hang before continuing. You'd have every media outlet running a special about how I'm a misogynist before I even left this building. The headlines would be screaming, and you'd be leading the charge, wouldn't you? Minji opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Jin wasn't done yet. For the first time in the interview, Minji looked unsure. The room was no longer hers to control. The audience, which had started the evening leaning in her favor, was shifting, not necessarily toward Jin, but away from her. Jin leaned back in his chair, relaxed, his expression unreadable. But when he spoke again, there was an edge to his voice. Let's talk about outdated. The word was yours, but now it belongs to me. He clasped his hands together, his voice steady. My mother raised 3 children while running her own business. She speaks 3 languages. She's been my rock through every high and low of my career. And you, a so-called advocate for women's empowerment, sit here and try to reduce her value to an expiration date. Minji shifted in her chair, forcing a small smirk. Oh, come on, Jin SSI. It was just a joke. Jin tilted his head. A joke? Well, let me ask you something, Minji SSI. Do you have an expiration date? The smirk vanished. The audience made a sound, half gasp, half murmur. Minji's fingers twitched slightly against the table. She was calculating, scrambling for a way to spin this back in her favor. Jin didn't wait. You want to talk about outdated like it's some kind of punchline? Let's be real here. If a male idol had sat in this chair and called a female idol outdated, you'd be calling for his career, his job, his head on a plate. A flicker of something crossed Minji's face. She knew he wasn't wrong, but Jin wasn't done. You know what's really outdated, Minji SSI? He gestured vaguely around the set. This tired, lazy, recycled strategy of trying to humiliate idols by attacking their families, their mothers, their personal lives. When you can't take me down, you go after the people around me. Minji shook her head, laughing lightly. Oh, please, Jin SSI. But Jin cut in, his tone sharper now. Did you ask any other idol if they've ever thought about leaving their parents? No, you didn't. Because you know it's disgusting. You know it's low. But when it's me, suddenly it's just a joke. Silence. Even the crew members behind the cameras had stopped moving. Minji's jaw was tight. She wasn't used to losing control. But Jin wasn't just on the defense. He was flipping the entire script. He shook his head, exhaling. You know, Minji SSI, for years, you've been screaming about respect, about family values, about dignity. And yet, the first chance you get, you sit here and mock my mother simply because she's over 50. Another shift in the audience. People were rethinking. Jin let out a chuckle, but it wasn't one of amusement. It was disbelief. So tell me, Minji SSI, when does a woman become outdated in your eyes? What's the cutoff? 45? 50? Should we just start retiring women from relevance once they hit a certain age? Minji had nothing. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The audience was no longer with her. She had thrown a punch, expecting Jin to stumble. Instead, she had given him the moment of the night. But the fallout was just beginning. Minji sat up straighter, pushing back against the wave of silence that had settled over the studio. She was scrambling now, trying to regain control of the conversation before it slipped entirely out of her hands. A forced laugh. Oh, Jin SSI, you're being dramatic. It was just a little fun. Jin cut in, shaking his head. No, Minji SSI, it wasn't. And you know it. His tone was controlled but firm, like a man who had seen this game played 1,000 times before. If it was just a little fun, you wouldn't be squirming in your seat right now. The audience felt the shift. The power in the room had flipped, and everyone knew it. Minji tried to push forward. She glanced toward the crowd, as if looking for support. I think we're getting a little off track here. I was just making an observation. Your mother is wonderful, of course, but let's be real. Most idols in your position tend to, focus on their careers and leave their families out of it. Jin smirked. And there it is. Minji hesitated. There what? Jin leaned forward slightly, elbows on the desk. That little trick you all love to use. You insult someone, you mock them, and when you get called out, you hide behind, I was just making an observation. No, Minji, you were trying to humiliate my mother. Minji opened her mouth, but Jin wasn't finished. And let me ask you something. Since we're talking about appearances, about outdated people, he gestured toward her. You're what, mid-40s? A sharp inhale. Minji's eyes flashed. She forced a smile, but there was nothing natural about it. Why does that matter? Jin shrugged. I'm just making an observation. The audience exploded. Some laughed, some gasped, others just watched. Because this wasn't the interview they had expected. Minji's face darkened. That's different. Why? Jin's voice was calm, calculated. Because now it's about you. Minji stammered. She was losing, and she knew it. Jin pressed on. You want to sit there and talk about outdated women, but the second I turn it around, suddenly it's offensive. Suddenly it's different. You don't like it when the mirror is held up, do you? Minji was out of options. She let out a nervous chuckle, waving a dismissive hand. Okay, I get it. Let's move on. Jin leaned back in his chair. Yeah, I thought so. And just like that, Park Minji had lost control of the interview. The audience felt it. The crew felt it. And soon, the entire internet would feel it too. But the real explosion was about to happen online. It didn't take long. Within minutes of the interview wrapping up, clips of the exchange flooded social media. The moment Minji asked her now infamous question, followed by Jin's unflinching takedown, spread like wildfire on X, formerly Twitter. One of the first viral posts read, Park Minji thought she was about to embarrass Jin. Instead, she got obliterated on live TV. This is brutal. The clip had already amassed over 3 million views within the first hour. Comment sections erupted. Imagine the outrage if someone called another idol's mother outdated on national TV. Minji just played herself. Jin didn't just defend his mom. He exposed the hypocrisy of these so-called advocates. This is why the media is a joke. They'll preach about respect, but attack a family the first chance they get. The divide was instant. While armies praised Jin for standing up for his mother and flipping the script on Minji, her supporters tried to spin the moment in her favor. On one major network, a commentator labeled the exchange an unnecessary outburst and accused Jin of bullying a journalist. But that argument didn't land the way they'd hoped. Because people weren't just talking about Jin's response, they were talking about Minji's question. Why did she think it was okay to frame his mother that way? Why did she assume women had an expiration date? The backlash against Minji was swift and relentless. That'd be why the next morning, headlines dominated the news cycle. Park Minji under fire for disrespectful question about Jin's mother. Did Park Minji cross the line? Feminist hypocrisy. Host faces backlash for outdated remark. Sponsors for Minji's show began feeling the heat. Emails poured in, demanding to know whether they condoned ageism and double standards. She tried to respond on Instagram, posting a short, carefully crafted statement. As a journalist, I ask tough questions. That's my job. I regret if my words were misinterpreted, but I stand by my right to challenge public figures. It didn't help, because no one was misinterpreting anything. They had all heard it clear as day, and the internet wasn't done with her yet. But the real fallout was just beginning. By the next evening, Park Minji's name was everywhere, but not in the way she had hoped. What started as an attempt to humiliate Jin had backfired spectacularly, turning her into the target of a backlash she hadn't anticipated. Media watchdog groups called her out for ageism and hypocrisy. One op-ed in a major newspaper questioned why a host who had spent years championing women's rights would mock a woman based on her age. Even some of her colleagues distanced themselves from her remarks. One anchor reluctantly admitted, "Look, I'm no fan of Jin, but this question wasn't journalism. It was a cheap shot," and he turned it around on her hard. Meanwhile, entertainment outlets had a field day. On one popular show, a panel dissected the moment frame by frame, calling it one of the most embarrassing moments in television history. Minji's employers were in damage control mode. By the end of the week, a leaked memo revealed that executives at the network were furious. While they publicly supported Minji, privately they knew this was bad. Viewership for her show had plummeted, advertisers were hesitant, and the network wasn't willing to take a hit for her. The following Monday, Minji opened her show with an apology, a forced, half-hearted attempt to calm the outrage. In the heat of the moment, I made a remark that was taken the wrong way. It was never my intention to offend or degrade anyone. I deeply respect Jin's mother, and I regret if my words were misinterpreted. It didn't work. Comments flooded in immediately. Classic non-apology. Taken the wrong way? We all heard you loud and clear. You regret that people noticed your hypocrisy, not what you said. So much for empowering women. By the end of the month, Park Min-ji was on vacation. Some said it was a quiet suspension. Others speculated that she was done for good. One thing was certain. She had underestimated Jin. She thought she could land a punch and move on, but she had walked into a storm she wasn't prepared for. And the conversation was far from over. The dust was still settling, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Park Min-ji anymore. This interview had exposed something deeper. In the days that followed, discussions stretched beyond Jin, beyond his mother, beyond even Min-ji. The moment had turned into a debate about media bias, double standards, and the way families, especially those of public figures, were treated. Commentators pointed out the blatant hypocrisy. If this had been another idol's family, the media would be calling it disrespectful. But because it's Jin, they laugh. Even some of Min-ji's usual supporters admitted the question had been out of line. I don't like Jin, but there's something ugly about using a mother's age as an attack. We don't do that to men. The conversation wasn't just about Jin's mother anymore. It was about respect. It was about the hypocrisy of the so-called empowerment movement that only protects the people they agree with. And for many people watching, it was a wake-up call. Jin's mother was many things: a businesswoman, a supportive parent, a role model, but she was not outdated. She was not disposable, and no woman should be. The moment Park Min-ji smirked and thought she had landed her punchline, she had already lost. She exposed herself. And Jin? He didn't just win the argument. He changed the conversation.